going to look at today a little bit the makeup of the different generations and what you're going to be facing, and really emphasize the importance of treating people differently, not treating everyone equally from the perspective of what motivates them, what drives them, what gives them a reason to give. Successful development requires you to communicate in at least 4 different languages. And you need to know how to communicate to those to whom you're going to minister and serve, and it's important. You want to make sure that as you are making a presentation, as you're structuring your proposals, as you are sitting down with someone, that you have a good understanding of where they're coming from. Let's examine the different generations. The first generation we're going to look at today is a generation that most of you don't have any clue about. This would be generations born 1901 to 1921. My mom and dad fall in this. My dad was 1919, my mom was 1920. It's a generation I can understand very strongly. Most of you, although we do have a few gray hairs, most of you probably don't have a clue. This may have been your grandparents, probably even your great-grandparents for some of you. This is a generation that a lot of people understood who Jesus Christ was. They had a relationship with Jesus Christ. The way that they looked at life was from the idea that they know different principles, different messages. When we said the term, the Great Commission, they would understand what that term meant. You know, some studies at Barna would say that there's a large segment of the audience that you say today, the Great Commission, and people get a blank look on their faces. You know, here we say, help fulfill the Great Commission in this generation. You know there is a large segment of the audience that are saying, okay, can you just explain to me what that Great Commission is? I just want to understand what that means. These are individuals who understood this. We look at the next generation that comes in, and that's the silent generation. Those are individuals that were born just before and leading up to the war. Silent generation. We start to see in the first generation, the GI generation, that 65% of the people knew Christ. In the silent generation, that number, 65%, dropped down to 50%. Fewer and fewer people understand who Jesus Christ is. Fewer and fewer people are interested in the whole idea of religion. This generation was a very loyal generation, and they were a generation that were committed to specific things. My mom and dad, in so many ways, between the GI generation and the silent generation, falling in between that, I saw so much about the way that they did things. They were so loyal to things. They are what I refer to as brand loyal. My dad always drove a Buick. It wouldn't matter how bad it looked, no matter what the style was, whether the quality. We didn't have Consumer Reports when I grew up. You know, you weren't looking at things. My dad always drove a Buick. That's just the way he was. These individuals were very brand loyal also to the organizations that they gave to. We know that the number of organizations, especially Christian organizations, were a lot smaller. We know that there were a handful of ministries out there, and those ministries people were very, very loyal and committed to those. And no matter what they did, no matter how much they frustrated them, people stuck with it. Then you move into another generation where things change. This is where I fit in. This is where I come in. Things began to change, and I saw that a lot. Brand loyalty changed. My generation started saying, I don't want to stay with a Buick or my father's Oldsmobile. I want to go with where the quality is. If it means I go overseas to Japan to buy a Toyota or to buy a Lexus, I'm going to do it. I'm going where the quality is. People made those same decisions with the ministries they supported, the churches they were involved in. Hey, if my pastor says something I'm frustrated with, there's another church I can go down to down the street. If I'm frustrated with this particular ministry, I'm going to go somewhere else. We see in the baby boomer generation a generation that changed. They moved from organization to organization. They might give you $100 here, but they might give $100 over there. And they might give until you upset them and they move over to here. They also, in their giving, focused in on the organizations as baby boomers that they could get involved in. My parents never thought about getting involved and being an owner in a ministry. That was not even part of their perspective. What does this mean? That in your silent generation, you may have donors that are involved that way. They have no interest being on your board or doing extra work to be involved because that's not part of their makeup. But those people who are baby boomers, you're going to have to give them added special attention. And I'll bet a lot of you have seen that for a number of years. I have. I've seen where the baby boomers, they want to give input. They want to be on boards. They want to help to structure and direct the ministry and get involved. Is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? Neither. I mean, it's a great way for you to understand where they're coming from. Now, the great part is that I like individuals who want ownership because I know when an individual wants ownership, that means increased involvement, and increased involvement always means that people are going to begin to give more. Remember, we had 65% knowing Christ in the GI generation, 50% knew Christ in the silent. Baby boomers drop into 35% knowing Christ personally. The Buster generation is the next generation we look at. Those born from 65 to 74. That may include some of you in here. These individuals, we move down in the understanding. These people are 15% of people actually have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and know Christ. We're dropping. This is more of what we would refer to as the computer generation. These are individuals, their lives, they begin to introduce cell phones, ATMs, all this, again, everything related to the computer. The Generation X is the next grouping that we'll look at. 27 million individuals at this point in time. This is what we refer to as the MTV generation. These individuals are not willing to sacrifice, to make the same sacrifices as our parents did. These individuals are thinking more about themselves and thinking more about how that's going to affect and impact themselves more than how it's going to affect and impact others. We really see that this generation, as I refer to the MTV generation, these are the individuals who, although there are some things that they are socially involved in, they're more caught up in the closer knit relationships, and they'll bond. This is an example. I always use the TV show Friends. I used to use it a lot more when it was a lot more popular. But, you know, what do you have with Friends? You have 6 individuals who are close-knit, they bond. They don't necessarily bring a lot of other people, you know, from time to time, other people in their circle. But most of the time, it's just those 6 individuals who are close-knit. They have close-knit relationships, not a wide variety of relationships that might be in the boomer generation, as an example. They're close-knit and they trust just a handful of people. And the result, breaking into those individuals with the giving is a lot more difficult. They are involved in more social causes. We're seeing a lot of people that are socially oriented. Not as much yet. This generation, we haven't seen them develop in their commitment to Christian ministries like their parents. Now, certainly it could be that they just are not in that income stage yet, where they're able to give large gifts, but we're not seeing the significant gifts that we were seeing from our parents' generation. The next level that we look at, and this is where my kids fall in here, the millennial generation. We're still seeing the shaping of this. We know that communication and close communication is a big part of their lives. We also know, we've seen in the campus ministry, we also know that so much of where these people develop relationships is on the internet. We are starting to look in the campus ministry at increasing our e-commerce activity. What can we do to begin to get out to the donors to reach that generation? Areas where things have changed. We've got, at our Christmas conferences, those who grew up through Campus Crusade know the term Christmas conferences, and you know that there was always a student appeal. Last couple years, we've been putting kiosks at the back of the room, so the individual students who feel totally comfortable with the internet get up during a faith promise appeal and walk to the back of the room, key in their credit card, and can contribute that way. We've seen significant income, and Mike and Larry and some of the others can share real specific numbers, but we've seen a real jump in our internet giving. So we've seen definitely changes in over the years through these generations. And as you go in to meet with your donors, you've got to really look at what motivates these people and how do we treat these people differently. Some questions to ponder. Who is presently funding your ministry? If you haven't done somewhat of a survey to determine what are the age groups of your donors. As an example, one ministry that I was helping that's a non-campus crusade ministry a couple years ago, it was a denomination, older dying denomination. Their average age of their donor was 68 years old. There's a ministry that really has to be worried about the future. Now, as a contrast, some of the later numbers that I heard, I thought we were 43 to 45, which would be, 20 years younger than that ministry. And we're on definitely the earlier side. But you need to understand who funds your ministry. Very easy to go out there to give individuals a series of questions, put it in your receipt to respond back, maybe on the internet, where you can begin to look at what makes up your donor base. Why is that important? Well, as we look at our generations, you don't want to treat everyone equally. You don't want to, if you're made up of mostly silent generation donors, you don't want to be communicating with them solely through the internet. But if you're made up of, Generation X donors primarily, well, there's a lot of principles there. You may want to begin to increase your internet communication. So those are things you need to be looking at. Next, where does your ministry find its primary funding? Again, getting back to what's our audience? Where is the money coming from? Generally, of course, we know that 80-20 principle. 80% of your money comes from 20% of your people. But what makes up that? Is it mostly the silent generation or the baby boomers? What are we talking about? The busters? Who should be funding your ministry? Do you want primarily your ministry funded by the silent generation, people that are dying off? Or do you want to go to begin to target baby boomers and baby busters, Generation X? Do you want to look at those? Certainly, if you're planning on succeeding in the future, you need to be prepared to move that up. As we've seen, there is, the numbers continue to change, but somewhere in the double-digit, trillion numbers of individuals that the transfer of wealth from one generation to the next is going to be tremendous as we have moved, certainly from the silent generation to baby boomers, but now as baby boomers move on and start to transfer wealth, we're going to see more and more transferring of wealth. Are you equipped to talk to a generation other than your own? Would you feel comfortable to go in and talk to a Generation Y person or actually a Generation X person? Do you feel comfortable talking about the internet? Do you feel comfortable communicating on the internet? Does it make you cringe to think that you actually would have to type out an email? I've gotten spoiled, but just in having kids in high school, and I have to communicate with parents through sports and other activities. It's amazing how many people don't like to communicate through the internet. I do a lot of banquets, and we just hired someone at the Christian Embassy that is definitely in the Gen X, and she's used to communicating for everything through the internet. And we've got people on the ground who help to organize the banquets, and it's the silent generation. And she's trying to communicate with them through email, and they're not responding. And it gets them on the phone, and they say, "Oh yeah, my husband bought me that thing called an email address, but I've never used that before." And so, it's trying to understand that difference in the generations. Is your ministry prepared to adapt ministry to address generational issues? If you are locked in to silent generation or the ideas of just the baby boomers, your ministry isn't going to last very long. You've got to be on the cutting edge. Some practical suggestions. A, teach and preach biblical stewardship. It's important that you understand it. How do people relate to biblical stewardship? Generationally, people will understand concepts, but I can tell you that the silent generation certainly understands the concept of tithing and being involved in making sacrificial gifts a lot more than Gen X and even some baby boomers. So you're going to have to take more time explaining to some of your younger donors what it means to tithe, what it means to understand good biblical stewardship principles. Find some good books, some good materials to help people to understand that. Teach Christian financial planning. We've got some good resources, Jerry Ware and his team. If you haven't been involved in the things that they're doing, some great estate planning, estate design information that they need to understand. And it's not just the silent generation or baby boomers that need to be thinking about estate planning and estate design. We need to be thinking the Gen X and Gen Y needs to be thinking about the future as well too. It may be something where you introduce it to them. Segment. What does segment mean? We're talking about segregating your donor base to reach and present different needs. There's certainly, you can separate people by categories such as gift level. That's one area. Gift amount. What's their largest single gift? But you can also segment them into areas of interest and also into generational categories as well too, to the extent that you know their birth date. And you can set aside and do mailings specifically to people who are of a certain generational level, where the interest in wills, trusts, and estates may be better. So that's something to be thinking about. D, provide donors with mission experience. Get those people out there to have activities on the field. E, pay attention to stewardship of time. And individuals need to make sure that you are being good stewards of your time and of their time. You need to make sure that you are utilizing, in each generation especially, the different aspects of time. Some people can give you more time. Some of them aren't married, some of them don't have kids. Utilize those individuals when they have that time. And certainly understand that the ones whose kids are smaller or teenagers, they can't give as much time as some. So you need to look at that aspect of things. Work for excellence and transparency in your ministry. Open things up to the donors. Make sure that they feel free to come to you with questions. You want them, you want your ministry partners to have ownership. I've said that so many times, and it's so true. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable to be able to look at your books, to ask the tough questions. You want to be going to them, not just expect them to come to you. You want to go to them and say, hey, could you look at our reports and see if this is the most effective way to present things? G, become a student of other generations. Make sure you don't just, our comfort level is to just stay with those people that are in our generation because we feel all warm and fuzzy with those people. You know what, go down. I'm as much as I must look like a square, I'm sure, to my kids, I try and get to understand my kids' friends and the things that they're doing. Communicate the results of your ministry. Again, we come back to results. Doesn't matter what generation. Now, there's certain expectations. Remember I said my parents could care less about the results. They just trusted the ministry. Baby boomers, they want to know results. And every generation, it really has continued to be important for them to see what the results are. And so continue to communicate those results. Don't limit financial stewardship to any one generation. So don't assume that this generation is the only one that understands that. Let's look at generations in the Bible. Be aware and all things to all people. You want to be aware. We want to make sure that we've got a good understanding. We don't have to be our kids or be Generation Y or be Generation X, but we should at least have a good understanding. We shouldn't, computers and the internet and all the things that are around that should not scare us. We need to have a good general understanding of all those kind of things. Be smart. Another generation grew up after them who did not know the Lord. And we need to make sure that in all the things that we do, we're understanding where the generations are in their understanding with the Lord, and we need to present the message to them so that they understand. Remember I talked about how Barna's done some studies that have said that there is a good chunk of our society right now that doesn't even understand the term Great Commission, doesn't know what the greatest commandment is. There's no understanding of some of those concepts. So to use those terms, even the term believer, that's, Dr. Bright, which I appreciate a lot about him. He started using the term follower of Christ, as in his latter years, because he knew that believers meant something to some people, but wasn't necessarily always a term that everyone understood. And I thought he did a good job over the years of really, you take from 51 to 2003 or whatever when he passed away. We really saw that there was a big, he was able to really work through the generations of understanding those things. See, trust God. God's sovereignty is from generation to generation. And we need to just believe God that he will continue to provide. He's going to be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So we need to remember to trust in him. See, God understands. God's steadfast love endures forever to all generations. And we need to just understand that God is going to help us bridge those gaps. That if you go to him and say, I'm not understanding this generation, I'm not understanding these people, help me to understand that God will definitely hear our call and he will definitely help us work through those things.